What's up, guys? Welcome back to Bible from the Dunns. Today we're in Judges chapter number 8. Let's get started.
Okay. Judges chapter 8 wraps up the life and the ministry of Gideon. So at the beginning of chapter number 8, it comes right after Gideon's big battle with the Midianites. And the rest of chapter 8 is just him kind of tying up some loose ends of battle. And then by the end of chapter 8, Gideon is dead and he is gone, and the next generation is stepping up. Now, toward the end of chapter number 8, I'm going to talk about that in a couple of Sundays. So we're going to kind of stay away from Gideon's death and how that unfolded. But we'll get into this a little bit. What I think is interesting is at the beginning of chapter number 8, there are a couple of other tribes who come to meet Gideon, and they're very angry that he didn't call them to help come fight in this big war. And what's interesting about that is, like, where were these guys when everybody else was showing up? Have you ever met somebody who always showed up at just the right time for all the stuff to be finished, and then but that's when they came in? That's exactly what's happening in this passage. What's also interesting is, if they were so eager to fight, like the Midianites had been ruling over Israel for at least 7 years, where were they during 7 years? And so the whole conversation they're having, really, it doesn't hold water. Now, a couple of things that we want to take just kind of as takeaways here. Jax is going to talk us through one of them. What was your takeaway?
Okay, so towards the end of Gideon's life, we see a lot of development in him. So at first, when we were introduced to Gideon, the Bible straight up calls him weak. But now we see this very powerful warlord type of guy who kills these Midianites. And we see how he's come a very long way from saying, "Oh God, I can't do this," to killing people. But we see that this is another really good example of God's plan working out. And so what he says is true, even if it does mean that the weakest guy who no one ever would have thought would be a powerful leader becomes a great leader who we still talk about, like, 3,000 years later.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
All right, let me ask you this. Do you remember all the way back in Judges chapter 6 when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon? Mm-hmm. Do you remember what he called Gideon when he first met him?
Oh, mighty man of valor.
Oh, mighty man of valor. Now, did Gideon feel like a mighty man of valor in chapter 6?
Not at all.
Okay, but is he behaving like a mighty man of valor in chapter 8?
Absolutely.
So God knew Gideon better than Gideon knew Gideon, and probably God knows us better than we know us. And so when we look for our identity, we don't look for our identity in what other people think of us or what other people say or any other circumstance. Where do we ultimately find our identity?
God.
In God. Because he sees what nobody else sees, and he knows what nobody else knows. Now let me kind of give you some practical stuff here. At the beginning of chapter 8, whenever these other tribes come to Gideon, and they're angry, like, they're so angry, they're ready to fight Gideon, which I always thought was dumb, because, I mean, if Gideon and his army had just won a war, the dumbest thing you can do is go pick a fight with the guys who just beat up the other guys.
Because they got the plunder.
That's right. I mean, come on. Okay, so anyway, these guys come to Gideon, and they're fussing with him, and they says in verse number 1, it says, "And they reprimanded him sharply." Now, that probably is just a gentle way of saying these guys got all in his face. They were ready to fight. They were ready to make this a whole big deal. And yet in the very next verse, Gideon, like, calmly talks to these guys. He says in verse 2, "So he said to them, 'What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer?'" Abiezer was Gideon's family, and Ephraim was the family that he was talking to. So he was saying, "You guys are great. No, don't worry about it. Listen, who am I compared to you?" Now, truth is, who Gideon is, he was the guy that just won the battle. And but he's talking to these guys, and he's not escalating the situation. Let me tell you where this comes into play. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 15, it says this. It says, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. The tongue of the wise uses it rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness." Can I tell you this? Probably these guys, the tribe of Ephraim who come to Gideon and they're trying to start trouble, probably we can all agree they were in the wrong on this deal. But you know what that does not give Gideon to do? It does not give Gideon license to be ungodly to them. So really, what we're finding here is no matter how people talk to you, we never get a free license to talk to them unbiblically. That's hard to do. Matter of fact, Jesus is going to come back later and he's going to say, if a man strikes you on one cheek, you're to turn and offer what? The other cheek. So this is kingdom living. Even though they're talking at him however they want to, he doesn't respond that way. Now, Jack's had another interesting insight about the history of this story. Tell us what you saw.
Okay, so this is obviously after the events of Joseph, who had the coat of many colors and later became the second highest in Egypt.
That's right.
And so he was sold to the Ishmaelites who were in slavery. And so I was wondering how in verse 24 it says, "Then he said to them, 'Let me make a request of you. Everyone give me an earring from his plunder.' Now the enemy had gold earrings because they were the Ishmaelites." So I'm kind of wondering how Gideon, who's the leader of the Israelites, they were fighting against the Ishmaelites.
Okay, so let's track the history back. The patriarchs were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham had how many sons does the Bible focus on?
About two.
Two sons. Now, he had more sons later, but he had two initial sons. He had Ishmael and he had Isaac. Now, who was Isaac's mom? Do you remember? Sarah. Who was Ishmael's mom? Hagar. Now, God promised that he was going to give Abraham a son of promise through Sarah. And they were really old. Like Abraham was 100 whenever Isaac was born. Sarah was 90 when Isaac was born. But prior to that, Abraham and Sarah got tired of waiting. And so Abraham went and married a much younger lady named Hagar, who, by the way, was Egyptian. And they had a baby named Ishmael. So Abraham didn't wait on God and didn't trust God. And so he had Ishmael, but the child of promise was Isaac. And all throughout that story, there's this conflict between Isaac and Ishmael. Now, hundreds and hundreds of years later, we've still got conflict between the Israelites, which came from Isaac, and the Ishmaelites, which came from Abraham not doing what he was supposed to do. So all of this really comes back to say, do you remember when the Bible says, whatsoever a man sows, that will he also reap? What that means is what we plant is what sprouts up. And so what's important here, I think, is these are long-term consequences of a sin that happened a long time ago. And in our lives and in our families, we got to be careful what we do, because what we do probably is going to leave a trail for those who come behind us. Now, this is an interesting story. I want to get to the ending of Gideon in about 2 Sundays from now. So we'll stick around and we'll see you then. Tomorrow, let's pick up in Judges chapter 9. Have a great day. Bye.